Welcome back to our next edition of the Texas Business Court Insider, where we're tracking the Texas Business Court and beyond. I'm Rafe Schaefer, and with me today is Andrew Price. Andrew, what are we talking about today?
We're going to be talking about the business court's opinion in Unimacts Global LLC versus Ayr Energy. This was a case published by the business court less than 2 weeks ago at the end of May 2026. And this is one of the business court's first opinions in the realm of trade secrets. And it also demonstrates something interesting about how the business court is using other Texas cases as precedential. Rafe, let's dive in. Tell us a little bit about this case.
Sure. So we'll start with the procedural posture, which is this is an opinion written by Judge Bernard at the Texas Rule of Civil Procedure 91A motion to dismiss stage. The case is pending in the 11th Division, so the Houston area division of the business court, with Judge Bernard sitting through the exchange of benches procedure. The issue in the 91A motion was the argument by the defendants that the plaintiff's claims were preempted by the Texas Uniform Trade Secrets Act, also commonly referred to as TUTSA. So right off the bat, that's one interesting aspect of the case, that there's a TUTSA case that we're covering. We talked last year about House Bill 40, HB 40, from the 89th legislative session, which was passed last June. That bill expanded business court jurisdiction to include trade secret cases. And this is one of the business court's first trade secret cases dealing with kind of the nuts and bolts of trade secret law in depth. Andrew, can you talk to us about the way trade secret came up in the Unimacts case?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, Texas has adopted the Uniform Trade Secret Act, referred to, as you did, as TUTSA. And under that act, the legislature expressly preempted common law trade secret claims, in order to kind of bring some clarity and uniformity to this area of the law. However, the reach of TUTSA's preemption has been an open question in various courts that have analyzed it. Some federal courts have reached different decisions than some of our Texas state appellate courts. And Rafe, how did the business court handle this conflicting authority?
Well, it really didn't. It really didn't deal with the conflicting authority. The business court really didn't appear to be constrained by any of that precedent. It cited federal court cases. It cited cases from the Fifth Circuit. It cited cases out of circuit. It cited cases from Virginia. It cited state court opinions from the Houston Court of Appeals, the Austin Court of Appeals, the Corpus Christi Court of Appeals. But it didn't really ever take a case and hold that that case was controlling law. Instead, it really used that breadth of authority to analyze TUTSA independently, using all of those different case law sources as persuasive. And so, Andrew, faced with all of these case cites, what is your take on why the business court analyzed this as a fresh question of law, using all of these cases as persuasive precedent?
Well, we've talked about this before, Rafe, kind of going all the way back to some of our very first episodes. The Court of Appeals that is binding on the business court is the 15th Court of Appeals out of Austin. The Houston Court of Appeals is not binding precedent, even for cases like the Unimacts case that was in the Houston division of the business court. The 15th Court of Appeals, as everyone who follows us knows, is just as new as the business court, and there are no 15th Court of Appeals opinions on this issue. There's no Texas Supreme Court opinions on this issue of the extent of TUTSA's preemption. And so therefore, the business court was unrestrained in how to analyze this issue. And so that gave them great latitude. I think that's one of the things that the business court is a real powerful tool for the business court in terms of shaping the law that is going to impact business cases and businesses here in Texas, and they took full advantage in this instance, analyzing TUTSA preemption. So, Rafe, what happened in this case? What was the result?
So the court went through various different TUTSA preemption analysis. It talked about some cases that were, what I would call compare the elements cases, where you're comparing elements of different causes of action. It talked about cases that were using the, compare the pleaded facts analysis to determine whether there was preemption, and ultimately adopted the rule that while TUTSA clearly preempts theories of liability that would also prove misappropriation of trade secrets, it does not preempt theories of liability that are not based on the same facts as the misappropriation of trade secrets. And so it really focuses on the pleaded facts in the plaintiff's petition. And in this case, the pleading of additional wrongful conduct in addition to misappropriation of trade secrets, the court says that could independently prove breach of fiduciary duty, but not a claim for misappropriation of trade secrets, and therefore no preemption. And really, at bottom, you had a case where the plaintiff's allegations were pretty wide-ranging. The allegation was that Ayr, the defendant, had hired officers and employees to solicit customers and investors while still employed by Unimacts, and then used Unimacts company devices, emails, Microsoft Teams accounts to develop Ayr's competing business during the course of their employment while still at Unimacts. And so the business court holds TUTSA is not preempting a fiduciary duty claim when employees breach their duties by acting in their own interest and directly creating this separate competitive business, separate and apart from the use of trade secrets. And that kind of competing duty of these employees who were simultaneously employed by the plaintiff, Unimacts, while also setting up and developing Ayr's business, I think brings us to the second holding from the case. Judge Bernard analyzed whether or not the plaintiffs had sufficiently pled knowing participation by the entity defendant, Ayr. How did that analysis go?
Well, Judge Bernard used this as an opportunity to kind of remind us all and walk us through imputed knowledge, right? And so here, as you pointed out, the knowing participation issue was premised on the idea that the bad actor fiduciaries themselves had the knowledge. They had conflicting roles and loyalties and duties. And specifically, the plaintiff had alleged that the former employees, Edla Stuckey and Tulshan, had acted on behalf of Ayr when they solicited customers, sought investors, and used plaintiff's resources to establish Ayr's competing business. And the business court held that those alleged bad actors' knowledge, obviously they had knowledge of their own bad acts, that alone was sufficient to be imputed to Ayr itself. And so why is that? And, Judge Bernard, again, walked us through kind of some of the primers of imputed knowledge under Texas law. A corporation necessarily acts and acquires knowledge through its agents. And accordingly, an agent's knowledge that's acquired within the scope of the agent's authority is imputed to the principal. And here, what had happened was, since the pleading had alleged that these three employee bad actors had breached their fiduciary duty to Unimacts while acting simultaneously in the course and scope of their employment for Ayr, that was sufficient to impute the knowledge to Ayr at the pleading stage.
Thank you all for joining us in this edition of the Texas Business Court Insider. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you can see our next video drop. We'll see you next time.